Hello everybody, this is Speedy Master Dalton Perrine from ChessUniversity.com, and this is another video in the Tactics Time video series. In this video series, I'm going to be continuing to work on solving different tactics trainer positions here on Chess.com. With each position, I'm going to first of all show you the tactic, give you the chance to pause the video so you can work on solving the problem yourself, and then I'm going to be explaining my thought process and showing the solution to the different puzzles that we check out. So, without any more waiting around, it's time for some tactics here. So let's hit the start button and see what we're given. Okay, so black here has just made the move queen to e5. It is white's move in this position here. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with for white in this position. Okay, so white's move in this position here. So we definitely have a bit of a lineup. One thing to notice here is the lineup between the queen, bishop, and king on h8. So I'm already looking for ways to move the bishop away to check the opponent's king. However, black's last move does make this a little bit trickier because black's last move with queen to e5, the queen is now attacking my queen on the h5 square. So in this position, the queens are attacking each other. So I can't really just move the bishop back to d3, for example, because then black will, of course, just go ahead and capture the queen on h5 there. So I need to move the bishop away in a way that blocks this attack. I need to make sure that black cannot just capture my queen for free. The way to do this is with the move bishop back to f5. The king has to move over, of course, that's the only option. And now I can deliver the checkmate on the h7 square with the knowledge that black could not have captured my queen because the bishop was in the way. So after queen to h7, we have the checkmate, and that's the answer for this one. So really just taking a step back here, it's all about figuring out what you want to do. We would like to move the bishop away so that we can deliver the mate on h7 pretty soon. But we have to be careful. We can't just go to g6 or d3 or e4. We have to be very precise with where we move the bishop to. And it's also important that you know this checkmate pattern with the bishop on this diagonal, the king on g8, and the queen on h7. That's an important checkmate pattern to know for when you're attacking. Okay, let's go ahead and check out our next position. Okay, so in this position here, it is white's move right now. I'm not entirely sure how, but white's king made its way down to c7 in this position here. So white's move right now, black just played the move rook to g8. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with for white in this position here. Okay, so white's move in this position here. Always looking for those forcing moves, especially with any kind of tactic position. It's most likely there's going to be some kind of forcing move to make things work out here. So I'm looking for checks, then captures, then threats. The only two checks I see available are queen takes g7 check and queen takes g8 check. We'd have to calculate these for sure, because they are right next to the king and do take away some defenders of the king. If we do queen takes g7, the rook's going to take back. Again, like we've had in other videos, you always have to analyze one extra move or at least one extra move further. You can't just say, okay, I sacrificed my queen, that's bad. You can't just rule it out without looking for maybe a follow-up. If we do queen takes g7, though, after the rook takes, do we have a follow-up? Well, we do have rook to b8 check. However, it looks like the rook on g7 will just go back to g8, and I don't see an answer for white there. I don't really see a great follow-up. So we switch over to the other forcing move we might think about, queen takes g8. If we do queen takes g8, the big difference between taking the pawn and taking the rook is that we get rid of the rook as a defender. If we take the rook, the king takes back, of course, that's the only option. Then we go to b8, and it looks like we have a checkmate there, because the rook on d7 is covering the f7 square from the king. The king can't run up to the f7 square. And the rook on b8 delivers the back rank checkmate there. So it might be easy to rule out, okay, I know I can't just sacrifice the queen for a pawn or for a rook, but it's important that you don't rule out things too quickly. A lot of the times, sacrifices like that won't be necessary or will be bad, but when they do end up being good, they're very powerful. So taking the rook is the best move in this position. And then we want to use the b rook in this case. If we use the d rook, the problem with using the rook from d7 to d8 is that we give up the f7 square. We really need this rook on d7 to cover this f7 square. So we're going to use the other rook to deliver the back rank mate, and black is checkmated. There's nothing black can do here. Okay, let's move on to our next one. All right, so in this position here, it is black's move right now. White has just made the move pawn up to b3. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with for black in this position here. Okay, so in this position here, it is black's move right now. There's, again, we're going to always start with looking for our forcing moves, but it's also important in this position here to notice undefended pieces and critical squares as well. So let's look at those real quick before we look at forcing moves. E4 is a critical square, and we had previously in other videos talked about critical squares being squares or pieces on a square that are attacked and defended the same number of times. E4 in this position is attacked once and defended once. So 1 and 1, this is a critical square. C4 is also a critical square, attacked once by the queen, defended once by the bishop. So E4, C4, C3 is undefended, there's nobody guarding the knight. C2 is undefended, nobody's guarding the pawn. So some different things like that. So in this position, the answer to this one is not obvious at first. It's definitely not a... even when I was glancing at it, I didn't see the answer at first until I realized the idea with the critical squares. But let's go ahead and look now at our forcing moves. Now, in this position, there are no checks right now. There's just no way to check the opponent's king, so we're going to move on to captures. The only captures that I see are knight takes e4, which doesn't look good due to the knight just capturing back, and queen takes c4, which also doesn't look good due to the pawn capturing back. So I don't see any good checks or captures right now. So then we move on to threats or attacks in this position. How can we make a threat? And remember, a threat is typically when a lower valued piece is attacking a higher valued piece, or if you're threatening something like checkmate. In this position, the key move is a threat, and the best move in this position is the move b5. Now, this is a move that is definitely not the first move on our radar most of the time. Mainly because we might wonder, like, okay, what's the idea? What's the point of b5? Well, the idea behind playing the move b5 is that we're obviously attacking the bishop, but it's important to notice that this bishop on c4 is kind of pinned. If this bishop moves, we can capture that undefended knight on c3. So b5 is attacking a pinned piece, essentially. Now, with b5, if the bishop does take the pawn, then we can take the knight, but it looks like if we play b5, then the knight can simply capture. But you also have to keep in mind that the knight was defending previously a critical square. The knight was defending the e4 square when it's on c3, so if it captures the b5 pawn, it won't be guarding the e4 pawn anymore. Now, it might just seem like, okay, we go b5, the knight takes the pawn, we take on e4, 1 for 1. We won a pawn, they won a pawn, equal trade at that point. It's important to realize, though, that after b5, knight takes pawn, knight takes e4, we're attacking the queen, and it actually ends up that the queen is completely trapped in that case. When the knight's on e4 and the knight on c3 is gone off of this c3 square, the queen on g3 is attacked. It can't go to either of these light squares because the bishop covers those. It can't go to f4 because the pawn covers it. And it also can't go to h4 because the bishop will be attacking it when the knight's out of the way. So it does end up in this position that b5 is a pretty powerful move. And it's actually telling me that this is not the answer. I don't see the problem with b5. Huh. So now I'm curious what the answer actually is. It tells me this answer is incorrect in this position. So let's actually take a step back. Let's see if we can figure it out before we look at the actual answer here. I do think the b5 is good, though. I'm not entirely sure why that would be considered not the best move. Oh. So I was pointing out that the queen was undefended, or that the queen had some issues if we did knight takes e4. I'd completely overvalued all of this stuff on the queen side. I kind of found like a secondary tactic here, and you guys might have just completely thought I was crazy this entire time. The answer is actually not just simply knight to h5. So it looks like I was completely distracted by the b3 and pawn up to b5 and queen takes c3 tactics and stuff like that, when the answer is actually much simpler. Knight over to h5 simply traps the queen. So it looks like I kind of overthought this position, which is something you have to be careful about, actually, in a lot of chess positions. Sometimes the answer is a bit simpler than it might seem. So knight h5 actually is the simple answer, traps the queen. I do kind of like the idea, though. I wish maybe the position was altered somehow that knight h5 was not the answer. I wish maybe like a pawn on h5 was there right now, stopping me from doing that. Because b5, and then, you know, once the bishop moves, I take the knight, or if the knight does take on e4, I take on e4. Could be kind of like a secondary tactic. But obviously, knight h5 right now is the best move for sure. There's no question about that. I definitely just kind of overthought this position. So I have to be careful about that as well, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so if you got that answer, and were wondering why I was looking at all this other b5 stuff, well, very good job then. I kind of overthought this one, which is pretty funny. So anyways, that's it for these tactics in this video. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. I'll see you guys around in a future video or lesson for the chessuniversity.com. I'll see you in another video, hopefully, and I will talk with you guys again in the future. All right.